Hello, you absolutely amazing person, you. I have something exciting to share with you, and it is definitely different from all my other videos. The reality is, I have been working on something. I haven't been doing it alone, and I've been doing it for like 5 years. Now, you know me. You know that I work with Indigenous and non-Indigenous entities, helping Indigenous communities and peoples and entities to heal and stand strong in our teachings and our strength. And I help non-Indigenous Canadian entities learn the nuances of Indigenous engagement so that they can service Indigenous peoples and Indigenous markets. And I love the work I do. But it is nuanced and it is challenging, and sometimes it takes time. Are you listening, Premier Ford Bill 5 BS? But I digress. If you take the time, it can be such a heartwarming process. And today, what I want to share with you is living proof that I walk my talk. I don't just talk about working together, I do it. Today, you're going to meet Julia Gibson, an author, an amazing woman, a citizen of the US, and her and I are going to share our journey with you, a nuanced journey, one that required transparency and honesty, one that ended, well, this chapter at least, in the most absolutely amazing way. Let's talk about it. Hello, everyone. Mishko Pakanon Quain Additional Mungdo Dem. Once again, this is Sandy Boucher. I'm Red Thunderbolt Woman of the Loon Clan, a proud member of Seine River First Nation in Treaty 3 territory in Northern Ontario. And as I mentioned in the opening, I am here today with my friend and colleague and co-author and just amazing person, Julia Gibson. Yay! Thank you so much for joining me today, Julia. I know my followers are just going to love this because I never do this. And we have an exciting story to share that we've kept secret for a long time. And I'm not really known for doing that. So I'm actually really impressed that I was able to do that. So before we get into our journey, which is what I want to share with our followers, Julia, I'm just going to pass it over to you. Let people know who you are, what you do, where you are, and let's start there.
Hi, I'm Julia Gibson, and I live most of the time in Los Angeles, California, unceded Tongva territory. And I also spend summer times in the northern woods near the Great Lakes in the state of Michigan, the state that's called Michigan. So I'm a writer. I write fiction and some nonfiction. A lot of the fiction that I write is set in Michigan, including the book that Sandy and I are going to be talking about. And I'm a grandmother of 5, and I'm very, very honored and pleased to have gotten to know Sandy and to work at her side and to be inspired by her and to get to know her. And it's been a really rich time for me in the adventure that sort of unfolded with the writing of my first published novel, which we will talk about, which was called The Copper Hand. No, it wasn't called that. It was that was the original title. The title that it was published in was Copper Magic, a title I did not like, and which in and of itself was problematic, as we will discuss.
Yes, exactly. And you know what I realized when I kind of did an outline of what order we would talk about things today? As you well know, I do a lot of reconciliation work. I work with a lot of non-Indigenous people wanting to learn the nuances of how to work with Indigenous people in a respectful way. And one of the things I realized, or one of the things I come across on a regular basis, these poor people think they need to know everything about Indigenous people before they're able to have a respectful relationship, like everything down to like our ceremonies and the whole 9 yards. And when I knew I was going to ask you to introduce yourself, I was like, there is so much I don't know about Julia. And I think that's such a beautiful lesson in itself because it doesn't take having to know absolutely everything about someone to be able to work together. If you can go into it, from my perspective anyway, with respect and humility, honesty and transparency, I think you can build bridges. And I think that's hugely important. It's not about studying each other and memorizing our bios and all of that fun stuff, because we've had amazing conversations on this journey. And yeah, none of that was required. So thank you so much for sharing that. 5 grandkids. See, I didn't know that. That's epic.
Sometimes I actually put that in my bios, but sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I love that you brought that up because I didn't know, I only knew of you, and I think that we had been on some of the calls together with our common
Yeah. Our
mentor
mutual.
and friend.
Yeah.
But I didn't know much about you other than what I saw on your website and in your
Yes.
book. I did read your books before I contacted you the first time. So I
Awesome.
knew that I knew a lot about you actually because I knew something about your personal life and I knew what your history was a little bit. But as I think I've told you, when I first did contact you, I didn't think that you were the person or that you were going to say yes. I just hoped that you would know somebody who might say yes.
That's right, too. You asked for a referral. That's right. I had,
I didn't, I
yeah.
just thought, oh, well, she doesn't do this really. I mean,
Yeah.
she does reconciliation work, but I was looking for somebody to do a specific thing.
Yeah. And
And
speaking
we'll
of
talk
which,
about we'll talk about that so that people know what we're talking about. But
yeah.
no,
And
but I knew you only sort of on a professional level. And
yeah.
we got to know each other much in a more deep way over time.
Yeah. And funny, true fact, right now on my desk, right next to me, is a manuscript and a finished book, both of which they want my feedback on. So,
Yay! That is
so I
so good.
guess this is something I do. So, as Julia mentioned, so we've decided we're going to take you on this journey. And because we're both authors and it is based around a book or books, we're going to use chapters rather than sections on this journey. So I just thought that was a nice play on words and totally fitting for this. So, chapter 1 is something Julia already mentioned. It's Copper Magic. It's her first book. So, go for it.
So the book Copper Magic, which was called Copper Magic, what is a historical novel about a young girl, and she's in the land I spoke of, Upper Michigan, by the lakes that I grew up loving and still love. And I wanted to write about that place for a long time, and I didn't quite have a way in. But what I wanted to explore in the story was who belongs there and how did my ancestors, my great grandparents, come there as summer people when there were already people, white people by then, living as farmers and small town people, so that was a different culture. So as I wrote the story, I was like, well, what about the original people that were here? That's really the story. So I ended up having Indigenous content in the book. And it was, a significant thread in the book. And as I was writing, I thought, oh God, like, what am I doing? I know that this is, potentially problematic, but I'm going to do my best. I did my best. As I was going along, and this was a really long time ago, I started writing the book many, many years ago. And at the time when it was getting toward being in shape enough for my agent to send out, I was like, I need somebody to look at this. And I reached out to, academics and people who knew people and stuff, and I didn't get anywhere at all. I couldn't find a single person who would, look at the Indigenous content and tell me if I was on the right track or not. This was before sensitivity readers were an actual industry.
Yeah.
So, when the book was sold, I said to my editor, I'm worried about this. And she, a Chinese American editor, said, oh, no, your intention is good. You've done a good job here. So I was still a little bit leery about it, but yay, I sold my first book and I was, 60 years old or whatever. I mean, it was like really a huge deal for me.
Yeah.
So the book came out and immediately,
when did it come out? Do you remember?
It came out in 2014,
Okay.
i.e. 11 years ago.
Yep.
So it came out, and one of the first reviews I got was a really wonderful one. And then the second review that came out was from an Indigenous reviewer who slammed it.
Yeah. So, which is going to take us into chapter 2 here, which is, so the book went out. And by the way, before we get into the backlash, which is a huge part of this journey, but kudos to you, because like you said, this was before, like in Julia's in the US, obviously, but this was before like reconciliation, cultural sensitivity, all of that stuff, which we talk about on a regular basis. So the fact that you were aware enough to think of the original peoples and want them included in their book, like to so many people were still just invisible. So you get bonus points for that. I just wanted to put that out there. But now we're going to talk about chapter 2, which is the backlash and actually what leads to our journey together. So continue on.
Well, so this review came out and I was really embarrassed and ashamed. And, it really put a shadow on the triumph that I felt of being finally a published author after many years of struggle. But, I took it to heart. I mean, I just didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
there was nothing to do, so that just stayed with me. The book came out, a lot of people read it. It went into a second printing. People enjoyed it and stuff like that. But still, it gnawed at me. So eventually the book went out of print. And when it went out of print, my agent said, well, let's get the rights back. And I said, great. So we got the rights back and I thought, okay, well, maybe I can rewrite this thing. Maybe there's a way to do it well. I don't know if there is, but maybe there is. So I reached out to Sandy because I knew of her and I knew of the work that she was doing. And again, I didn't really dare to hope that Sandy would, in fact, be the person. I just thought maybe she'd know somebody who could be the person.
Yeah.
And Sandy's response was, let me take a look at it. I'd be interested in seeing what's up with this thing. So she did. And now maybe you should talk about what that was like for you.
So before we get into chapter 3, which is my first review of the book, I just wanted to highlight and point out that our mutual connection was Josephine Mandelman. So the original water walker, she was an elder and a friend of mine. She lived here in the city of Thunder Bay. She has passed on now, but her influence continues and touches people on a regular basis. And Julia, you were involved with the water walks as well, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, thanks, Joe, for bringing us together. So when Julia reached out, now, being an author, writing, that's like I've always said, it would be easier for me to give up breathing than it would be writing. So finding another author, a kindred spirit, was something that definitely intrigued me. But then when she had shared about the backlash and what's going on in the book, I just knew the climate that we exist in. For one, like both sides of the feather. For one, a non-Indigenous person writing about Indigenous peoples and things, that's very dangerous ground to be walking on. It's so nuanced, and I'm not talking intentionally trying to be disrespectful for or anything, because I've said 100 times, you don't need intent to hurt someone. I knew there was no ill intent, but I also knew that's next to impossible to do accurately. At the same time, I also knew the force of the backlash that sometimes happens. Depending on who the Indigenous voice is, it can be scolding, it can be terrific, horrific, I should say. And I really admired the fact that Julia had sustained that, had heard that, but wasn't giving up, that she was looking for the bridge, that she was looking for some understanding, some clarification. So I really respected that. If there's one thing I've come to learn about Julia, is she is naturally a humble person, and humility builds bridges. I've said that 100 times. If you go into a relationship, Indigenous and non, and you're all ego on either side, that
You're making me cry now.
well, egos burn bridges, but humility builds them. And often I run into people who minimize Indigenous engagement, and they say something along the lines of, well, I've been doing it for years, it's easy. But then when I start to talk to them, it's like, oh, that's because you're a humble person. It was easy for you. Like, because we recognize humility as one of our sacred teachings. So it's a commonality we can work with. So, Julie, oh, you wanted to jump in there?
Well, thank you for saying that. Actually, what was in my mind also, which I may or may not have said to you at the time, is that, well, I was totally prepared for the answer to be, there's nothing to be done. You've written about Indigenous people, not cool, can't fix it. But
Yeah.
I did want to be able to understand what was wrong.
Yeah.
And the review had pointed out some things, but I really wanted to understand better.
Yeah.
So even if it wasn't going to result in a new book or a new, the understanding itself was really what I was after.
Yeah.
And so I was hoping that somebody would be generous enough and, willing enough to help me with that.
Yeah. So
And you were, and then I think I did say to you at the beginning, like, this, if you think that this is not, I'm totally willing to walk away. I
Yeah.
mean, but you came back and said
yeah.
what you said.
So she sent me the book, right? I still have it on my bookshelf. I came
And now we have the
this
sticker.
weekend.
Now we have the sticker.
Yes, yes. So you sent me the book, and it, as so happens, I was doing a youth event that weekend, I should say. And for those in Northern Ontario or in the Thunder Bay region, if you're familiar with Quetico Park at all, and what used to be the Quetico Conference Center, so it has, now it's been sold, but at the time it had been abandoned for quite a few years. They were holding a youth gathering there. It was literally in the middle of the bush. We were going to stay in the old dorms where the students had stayed. Think heavy 1970. And there, no TV, no radio, no internet. So the timing could not have been better, because it was like, well, now I have something I can do in the quiet times. I'm going to read this book. And so I'm literally in like a dorm room writing a paper on copper magic. And I can honestly say, and I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, Julia, I was more than willing to go through the book and make my comments, which I absolutely did. And that's what I sent to you. But as someone who does the work I do, I was also bracing myself for backlash, because often people ask for feedback, but then you run right smack into white fragility. And and for any other author, any author out there, our books are our babies. Like, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't coming across as criticizing the book. I love the book. Like Julia has heard me say that a million times. I love the characters. I love the story. I have read it so many times now, and I would read it again willingly. It's just a well written, amazing story. But there were things that were problematic. For one, even the title, Julia touched on that. The fact that Indigenous knowing and spirituality are touched on in this book, not from a place of knowledge, actually a lack of knowledge, which is such a commonality for so many Indigenous people who have been separated from their culture and their teachings, and they feel in their blood memory that they know something, but they don't really know it. And that's an authentic experience and a common experience. And those were the kind of things that were touched on in the book, which is beautiful. But even the title itself, Copper Magic, comparing Indigenous spirituality and our teachings and way of knowing to magic, felt disrespectful. So anyone who knows me, I tend to be very direct and very transparent. And what I'm thinking is what you're going to hear. And I sent back quite a few comments on the book.
It was long. It was about, maybe 5, 6 pages, single
Exactly.
spaced. It was a lot,
Exactly. Yeah. And
but it
I
was
was like,
detailed. I mean, you went into a lot of detail, and you did.
yeah. And I
I
really
mean, we
tried.
went further than that, but you did
Yeah.
explain.
And I really tried not to just say, this sentence is so wrong, but explaining why. Like what to me, it felt like it was implying what the actual truth would be of an Indigenous person in this experience. And I don't think I went as far as suggestions, but definitely highlighting what the errors were or what the issues would be. So I went through this, and even then, I loved the book, but there were definite. I knew why the backlash. It
I
was
remember. I remember the
obvious to me.
phrase you used. You remember the phrase you used?
No.
You said, "Some of this is very cringy."
Yeah. And I think already I had like a just a warm vibe, a warm impression of you. So it was, I knew you didn't want to cause harm. I knew, and I also knew you cared not to. And yeah, there were just points in that book. It's like where I almost wanted to put it down. And it was like, okay, no, that's not what the assignment is. We knew we were going to run into things. That's what it is. Just share honestly and then leave it in creators' hands. So I sent back my feedback and just had no idea if there was going to be a next chapter, if I was going to get a really nasty email. And
No.
well, but it's something I want to touch on for my followers because that is on both sides of the feather again. That is one of the things that really prevents these kind of relationships, that both sides are so terrified of a backlash. Like,
Hmm.
are they actually able to hear me? Do they understand I'm not attacking, but I am being honest? Right. And it happens enough time for it to be a justifiable fear on both sides. And if you want to enter these relationships, you have to be humble enough and open enough to hear when someone says, this doesn't work for me, or this is cringy, or whatever the case may be, and not take that personally, but rather as an invitation to make this better. Right. So I think that's key to why this journey actually turned out to be an awesome experience for both of us. So I'm going to kick it back over to you now. So I sent that incredibly long comments back to you, and I don't remember receiving a nasty email from you. So what happened on your side?
Well, you were so thorough in that first pass, and that first, editorial letter, let's call it. So I think the next thing I did was I tried to sort of categorize the
Yeah.
problems. And one of them was that there is a character from the past, and
Yes.
a lot of most of her stuff was totally wrong and messed up. So I was willing to dump her entirely from the narrative, except for the first sort of vision of her. And you hung with that and said, well, wait a minute, maybe like, we don't have to do that. But but then there were some issues that were relatively minor,
Yeah.
but significant, but they weren't like, oh God, I've got to change a whole character or something. So once I kind of broke that down and said, okay, here's the key things. And here's the things we have to address, or that I need to understand better, or we need to get rid of, or whatever. And so we kind of worked through in stages. And I can't remember exactly what the first phase was. It might have been the easy. I think I started with the easy stuff. Like there was things about the clan symbolism
Yeah.
that was in there inadvertently that didn't work, for an Indigenous eye, right? So and then some of the things were bigger, about the big one was that in the original story, there's a man or a human made object made of copper that
Yeah.
is the power object. And you suggested using a natural object instead. And I had actually, had been my original concept for the book. But I got so enamored with the idea of the copper and how, copper has a whole history and the whole middle of the United States, and, the indigenous use of copper. And it was so interesting to me, and the beautiful,
Yeah.
um, creations that were made out of copper. So I got so taken up with that I overcame my own sort of inclination to use a stone or whatever. But anyway, so that was one thing. And I did resist that a little bit, I remember, with you.
Yeah.
And was like, well, I just love, I'm honoring, this wonderful art and everything, the sacred art. But so once we figured that out, that actually made a big change, because the object was different, the whole way that, it's found and used, and the way, so that all was kind of complicated in a way, or at least felt that way to me.
Yeah.
But most of the stuff was pretty straightforward, and you explained things so succinct. It didn't take much for me to kind of get it. Like, okay, well, but something, it was sort of like, okay. So one of the things was, in the original book, there's this sacred object, and the woman from the past is holding her arms to the sky. And you said, we don't do that. That's not. And instead, she would hold it maybe to herself.
Yeah.
And you had this whole great suggestion about when we did create it as a stone, that the copper in the stone would sort of match with the hand of somebody holding it, and it would sort of go, so the power in it would be felt.
Yeah.
And that was really beautiful. And you had so many wonderful suggestions. I mean, it was, and as we worked together, it just really became a partnership. I mean, it wasn't like a separation. I felt that way to me. It felt like we were sort of you put it as we were walking on the path, and you kept saying that throughout the time we spent doing that. And it really felt like that.
Yeah.
And it felt, that you were leading and I was behind. You were sort of clearing the path or something, but we were on the same path when we were together. And then sometimes we were side by side. I mean,
Yeah.
that was the imagery that just kept coming for me. And it was so satisfying and nourishing, and it felt so reparative.
Yeah.
I felt that I had made sort of a rent, or a damage in the universe somehow with this work, and that somehow, and that's why I called it an amended version,
Yeah.
amending and making amends, right?
Yeah.
And it felt like that, and I was so grateful, for your honesty and your creativity, and your and you kept with it too. Like, it really did take a long time.
Yeah.
Like, I would do one pass, and then one of us would be busy, and we just And we both, which I really loved, we both would say like, well, when the time is right,
Yeah.
we'll talk again or whatever. Or when the time is right, I'll get to this next pass or whatever. Because I was working on other stuff and you, of course, had a busy career. And, we weren't always in sync about timing. And
Yeah.
that was cool. That didn't matter to me at all. That was like,
Yeah.
okay, it's going to take what it takes and we'll see what happens. Like I didn't know if, I didn't know what was going to happen with this new version of the book.
Yeah.
Or if it would be satisfying to me ultimately as, a work. But it was just a wonderful collaboration
Yeah.
and partnership for me.
So a couple of things I just want to add into that. So Pam Palmer, amazing speaker, powerhouse, Indigenous, Mi'kmaq woman, always says if it's convenient, it's not reconciliation. And as Julia just pointed out, I think one of the reasons this journey was so enjoyable was there wasn't the pressure to get it done by Friday. We were honoring the journey and the discovery, of the nuances of the characters. And one thing I just realized as you were talking, I have been pretty adamant in Red Thunderbolt manner, like I always do, that non-Indigenous people, as a general rule, should not be writing Indigenous characters because you just don't have the worldview. But in the case of the character in this book, so her mom's Indigenous, her dad isn't. There's Indigenous people in the area, but she's not really connected with them. And it's almost like your non Indigenous lens made that character so authentic because she didn't have an Indigenous lens. She had some Indigenous knowing that we worked on and fine tuned, but that wasn't the way she saw the world. She remembered certain things her mom would do or things that made no sense to her now. So it almost seemed perfect. Like I couldn't write a character like that because how I see the world would seep into it. And then that would not be the journey of that character. So that was pretty awesome. And by the way, the other thing I want to say, because one of the major issues when it comes to Indigenous and non Indigenous working together is that Indigenous knowledge is not valued. And Julia actually paid me to do this consulting work with her. So from the get go, my contribution was respected. Julia, I think several times, are you sure you're okay with this? The compensation's okay, whatever. And it's like, it was just an absolutely respectful journey. And yes, we did several rewrites. And you would make changes and then send it back to me. And I always read the full thing from start to finish to see the flow. I definitely, the phrase go by feel. Every single time you did a rewrite and I read through it, it was like, is that cringe there? Like, is something going to catch me off guard? And sometimes there was one or two things and we would go through the process again. But one of the two things, I love that to me, the book got better with every rewrite. Like I loved it even more every
And you
single
kept saying
time.
that, which was so nourishing to me.
And I cried every single time.
Oh God.
Even though I know the book and I know how it ends and I know what happens, that it resonated that deeply. So I thought that was an absolutely beautiful experience. So long story short, we went. Now, how long has this journey been? Like
Well, I can't.
2 years, 3 years, something
Longer than that, I
longer than
think,
that?
even maybe five-ish.
Yeah, it's
I'd have
it's
to look,
been
but it took, it took years really to get the book to where it is now.
yeah.
Um,
So long story short, it is, well, I almost said the book is now done, but it's not. It's like in the last few tweaks stages of the book. It has a new title.
it has a new title, which is The Copper Stone. And then we both, I think, thought maybe simultaneously-ish that it should have a subtitle because or I think actually you pointed, I had it nagging in my mind that, it doesn't really say what the book is.
Yeah.
And so you suggested like it needs a subtitle. So I went on a crazy long journey. I even went to
It's fun.
AI, which I don't even want to know anything about, to try to find a subtitle. And and I kept bringing them to Sandy, and we didn't like anything. And it was like, oh God, what are we gonna? And because I knew at this point it was like it's got to have a subtitle.
Yeah.
I mean, we have. I mean, I'm not going to give up on finding one or creating one. And then somehow, and then maybe you had mentioned, you maybe suggested, but I think I came to it elsewhere, the phrase blood memory.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that that was an Indigenous phrase at all. I just thought, that makes sense. Yeah. So blood memory. Okay, I like it. And then you and I got on the phone and talked, and then you suggested a glimpse of blood memory as the subtitle, which works so well, and I really love it. And just it feels so, I can feel it in my cells, kind of
Yeah.
in my blood memory, which isn't the same as
Yeah.
the character's blood memory, or but it's I feel it.
Yeah. And to me, it absolutely described the book, the contents of the book, like that glimpse, that knowing she had, but not knowing, like, what is this, that blood memory? And back to something you said earlier. Yeah, just from a Anishinaabe perspective, like the ancestor had to stay in there, right? Like to some
Yeah.
extent, definitely she needed some reworking. She was a little too Hollywood Indian in the beginning, but yeah, I just love, 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 love how it ended up. And just bringing this to the end here, one of the reasons I really wanted to do this video and this chat with Julia and share it with you all is the book is launching June 21st, National Indigenous Day here in Canada, which just, that's just absolutely perfect.
Your idea.
Well, I didn't even remember that, but it's absolutely awesome. Julia, I don't know. I didn't ask you this ahead of time. So if you're not comfy with it, that's totally okay. This is how we've done our journey. But I was wondering if you could share like the text from the back cover.
Oh yeah, let me find it though. Hold on.
I just,
Yes.
just love this so much. Oh, your camera's off. Did you know that? There she is. I can't hear you, unfortunately. Do you have to put your earbuds back in? Is that? That little button on your earbuds controls, like, I cannot hear you. Oh no. Oh no, what happened? Oh no. I think you might have to sign out and sign back in. Okay. We had this challenge earlier, so we're just going to let Julia do that. Last time she signed out and signed back in, it absolutely worked. So, and I'm certain it will this time because I really, really, really want you to hear this. It just, we've alluded to the book. You should just imagine holding it in your hand and reading the back cover because you're gonna want to read the book. I'm just saying. Oh, here's Julia again. Let her back into the room, and there she is, and we can hear her.
I think every time I take out my headset somehow. So you're talking about the back of the book, the text that it describes
Yes,
the book. Okay.
yes.
Can unearthed wrongs heal what was broken? The year is 1906, and 12-year-old Violet Blake finds an unusual stone by the stream where her mother used to harvest medicine. Violet is certain that the stone is magic, and if anyone's in need of its power, it's Violet. Her mother and adored little brother are gone, perhaps never to return, and her heartbroken father can't seem to sustain the family's failing farm near the shores of Lake Michigan and the mysteriously clear Blue Lake. Surely the power of the stone can make things right for Violet and her fractured family. But as Violet grasps for the stone to serve her, and her alone, hidden truths are revealed, and peril is unleashed on those who don't deserve what comes their way.
I got chills.
It's
I just absolutely love it.
I'm so glad, and I love you. And I
Oh,
love everything that I have learned from you and been challenged by you. And I love that you challenge. You're not
well,
afraid to, say things that are difficult,
yeah.
that people
And
might be hard to take in. I
yeah,
mean, I just want to, the point that you made about, being willing or whatever you said about, I think because I've written for a long time and had my work critiqued a lot, I know what you mean. I mean, it's not, a lot of writers are very resistant. They don't really want
yeah,
feedback. They say they do, but they really don't. And I've
yeah.
seen this over and over again with people that have had me read things or whatever. But I'm in a very stringent writing community where, if I share my work, people tell the truth. And I want the truth. I don't want somebody to say, I love it. Why?
Yeah.
I mean, if that's all you have to say and there's nothing that, I mean, sometimes it's like, okay, well, it's really great, but a few words. Okay, I get that. But people need to tell the truth and be willing to take that in. If you're really serious about your work, that's what
Yeah.
you expect from people, and that's what you are glad to get if someone can do that. And you are able to do that. And I so appreciated that, you dug deep and you set it straight.
Yeah. You know
That's what
what?
I wanted to
Just
hear.
you just reminded me or made a very valid point. I think before I read either the manuscript or the book that's on my desk, I'm going to ask them and email them and ask them what they're looking for because it could be validation. It could be
Yes.
I need an Indigenous person to say this is great work. And that is totally different than authentic feedback.
Yes.
So, and do I really want to jump into that box? I don't think so. I don't do that very well. So, bottom line, the book is like this close to finish now. We are actually doing what turns out to be a kind of hybrid, half live, half virtual book tour, only because of the insanity that's going on between our two countries right now. But Julia, did you want to touch base on the event schedule that's coming up in July, where we're going to be, what we're going to be doing?
Yes, at the end of July, we have two events that are in the community that is my summer place and where the book is set. And one of them is at the community itself, which is great because a lot of people there have read the original book, and not many of them, I mean, my friends there know about the new book, but a lot of people don't. And I think they'll be really, really interested in it. And I think we'll have a lot of people who A, come to that event, and B, who will be interested in not just my book, but also Sandy's book, The Path, which we are offering as a companion
Yeah,
to the book because her work in reconciliation is so key to the story of the book, the
yeah,
story of the Copper Stone. Then we also have an event the next day. I forget the exact dates. I think it's the 28th and the 29th, but
yeah,
don't quote me exactly, at the public library in that town,
yeah,
where I also, with the first book, had an event. And it's a really lovely library. The people that work there are amazing. It's right on the bay there. It's really, really a sweet place. I'm sorry you can't be there in person, Sandy, because I know you'd love it.
yeah,
So that'll happen, and we'll get a different kind of crowd, more people locally and from the surrounding area, who also, some of them know the book, and it was carried in the local bookstore there, and I hope will be again, or the new one will. And then we have a couple that are in the works,
yeah,
um, and so I I think it's exciting that we're basically launching the book in the area where it takes place.
yeah.
And
Which,
that's one draw that people had to the book. It was like, oh, I know this place, I know this woods, I know these waters. And it's the history, but it's a sort of a loosely based real history of the coming of the summer people, and the displacement. There's some displacement story in there about the native people who were there originally.
yeah. And earlier I had said that it's pretty much a across the board rule for me that non-Indigenous people shouldn't write Indigenous characters. And what I love for those people that did read the first book and now hopefully will read the second is when someone else writes our story, then whoever reads it is denied the authentic story. And now the story is authentic, right? It has the nuances that could not have been there otherwise. So I'm really, really hoping that they read the new book because it is going to give them so much more understanding and insight into that part of the book. So, yeah, awesome. And for followers on my YouTube channel, Julia has agreed we're actually going to do a YouTube live on June 20th, looking at my notes here, at 12 o'clock Eastern. Hopefully, we can capture a whole bunch of time zones that way. So if you enjoyed this video or you have questions, that's come on out to the live. We are going to be doing a Q&A, just answering your questions and hopefully encouraging other people to take this kind of journey. It's not a quick journey, but it is so beneficial. I know it encouraged me and just warmed my heart so often that this is possible, that I'm not crazy in believing that this is possible because we actually did it. So Julia, thank you so, so much for being the human being you are and for reaching out and trusting me and hearing me and having those conversations. There were things we totally agreed on. There were things that we did a back and forth on, but we always found middle ground, right? So, yes.
Thank you also. I look forward to everything we do together in the future,
Yes, because I'm
whatever
really
that may be.
I'm pushing for the next chapter of
I know.
because it's got to continue. There's a story that needs to be told. So awesome. That is everything from us today. Again, thank you so much, Julia, not only for the amazing journey, but for joining me today so I could share this with my followers. It's been phenomenal, and our journey is nowhere near the end. So awesome.
Amen.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Until next time, I love you. Bye bye.